selected CEO of the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. We call it LA Metro, by the Los Angeles Metro Board of Directors on March 12, 2015. As LA Metro CEO, Washington manages a total balanced budget of $6.6 billion. I got that wrong. $6.6 billion for fiscal year 19. Is responsible for overseeing 15+ billion in capital projects, providing oversight of an agency of nearly 11,000 employees, and transports 1.4 million boarding passengers every day. He's a key leader in the 2016 successful effort to pass the new half-cent sales tax in LA County, which garnered 71.15% voter approval. He came to Los Angeles from Denver, Colorado, where he was assistant general manager for nearly 10 years prior to being named CEO in 2009. In Denver, Mr. Washington implemented Fast Track program, one of the largest voter-approved transportation expansion programs in the country. Also in Denver, he implemented the first and only $2.2 billion transit public-private partnership, which is still in operation. His emphasis was on measuring and managing agency performance led to a nearly 90% on-time bus and rail service. Wouldn't we all like that? Hey. Washington has had numerous prestigious assignments and honors. In 2007, he was appointed by the mayor of Denver to head host Transportation Committee for the 2008 Democratic National Convention. He was appointed by Colorado Governor Bill Ritter to serve on the state of Colorado's Workforce Development Council. He has testified before the U.S. Congressional Transportation Subcommittee and was awarded a White House Transportation Innovators Champion of Change Award in 2012. In 2014, he was selected by the editors of Engineering News Record for special recognition as one of the top 25 newsmakers of 2013. Originally from the south side of Chicago, the Chicago Housing Project of Altgeld Garden, Mr. Washington is a 24-year veteran of the United States Army, where he held the rank of Command Sergeant Major, the highest non-commissioned officer rank an enlisted soldier can achieve. He retired from active duty, being awarded the prestigious Defense Superior Service Medal for exceptional service to his country. He holds a BA in business from Columbia College, an MA in management from Webster University, and is a graduate of the Harvard University Kennedy School for Senior Executives in state and local government. He's also a past chair of APTA. I could go on and on. You've heard that he is a child of Bishop Goldsberry's church and has grown up among the saints. We are honored to have you here. Mr. Phil Washington, be the next one.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Walton. And let me first acknowledge Jesus Christ, who is the center of my life as well. Let me acknowledge Bishop Blake, who is my bishop, our bishop, and also the General Board, and also Bishop Bass as well, for setting up COGIC initiatives. When Bishop Blake calls me, I answer and I come. It's just wonderful to be here. As Bishop Blake and also Dr. Walton said, I grew up under the ministry of Bishop H.W. Goldsberry, and this is not my first convocation, actually. I remember going down to Memphis as a child and sleeping almost in Mason Temple because we could not afford a hotel room, me and my mother. Some of you know what I'm talking about there. And also grew up not only under the ministry of Bishop Goldsberry, but growing up listening and hearing and being inspired by people like Evangelist Richard D. Hinton and Bishop L.H. Ford, Bishop O.T. Jones, Evangelist John Lawrence, various others that inspired me as a child. So when I was at the service last night, I could not help but think when I saw young boys and young girls there at 9:30 at night, I couldn't help but think about me. As I was tired and sleepy, my mother said, "Hey, we're going to that midnight musical." So it's wonderful to be here. And let me acknowledge members of my family that are here. Got a couple of cousins that are here from Chicago, and a cousin here who insisted on filming me or videotaping me, I don't know. But it's wonderful to be here, and it's wonderful to be part of this panel here as well. Dr. Walton talked a little bit about, and Bishop Blake talked a little bit about LA County. LA County is the largest county in America. It is almost 11 million people just in the county. The county is larger than some 42 states, just the county. And so we are charged with really providing not just transportation services, but what I like to say is that we are stepping into leadership voids. Leadership voids as it pertains to infrastructure, which I'll talk just a little bit about. So I want to concentrate early on in my talk just about infrastructure, first of all. And what is it? The literal definition of infrastructure is really the basic structure and facilities needed for the operation of a society. And so what we're talking about is not just freeways and bridges and rail lines, but if you can go to the next slide, we're also talking about dams and water treatment plants, the electrical grid. All of these things is sort of the definition of infrastructure. Infrastructure is taken for granted. When you drive down the street, all you want is the street to be paved and smooth. You don't really think about infrastructure. We have been what I call on an infrastructure vacation in this country for the last 30 years. We have not invested in our infrastructure in this country in large part. And I believe that the Church of God in Christ should get involved in infrastructure, regardless of where you are. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what that looks like. Next slide. So I'm here today to urge your congregations, first of all, to care about infrastructure and get involved. Don't expect people to build things for you. We come with the community, with the best interests of the community at heart. Infrastructure building in your various regions need the church's input. When you get involved with infrastructure, and what we're talking about is all the things that I mentioned, if we allow infrastructure to be built in our communities without our input, sometimes we end up like in the 1930s or 1940s in New York, where infrastructure was built and underpasses were built intentionally lower so kids of color could not come from the city because buses could not fit under the infrastructure.
Wow.
And so when we talk about infrastructure, there's a relevancy. There's a relevancy to the communities. There's a relevancy to our involvement and our speaking out loud about infrastructure. Next slide. When we talk about Flint, Michigan, and I know that Bishop Brooks is here from Michigan as well. The water crisis, good example of what happens when vital infrastructure goes bad. So we're not just talking about, even though I'm responsible for mobility in the largest county in America, we are stepping into those leadership voids that talk about water and water treatment and bridges and tunnels. Imagine if COGIC leadership around the country made infrastructure a rallying cry. Now, we have just voted in a Democratic Congress. a couple of days ago who say that they will make infrastructure the top priority. COGIC and urban initiatives should be there meeting or requesting a meeting, first of all, with your transportation authorities around in your areas, and then on the national viewpoint, COGIC initiatives and the Church of God in Christ should be requesting a meeting with the Transportation Secretary for the Department of Transportation, Miss Elaine Chow, talking about infrastructure and what happens in your various communities. The economics and the jobs that go with this infrastructure push is really, really incredible, and the environmental justice that goes along with the building of infrastructure is very important. The public housing I grew up in on the south side of Chicago was built in the 1940s on a waste dump. And we always wondered why were kids sick, including myself, asthma and everything else. So we must understand that. Next slide, please. Bishop Blake talked a little bit about some of the projects that we're building. I took Bishop Blake down into a station box about 100 feet below the earth, where we were boring a tunnel through the earth, about a mile in length, moving the tunnel boring machine about 75 feet a day through the earth. And even though Bishop had a suit and tie on, one time I took him down there, he had a pair of jeans on. So he does have jeans. So we know that. So we want churches to think about infrastructure. Next slide, please. This is a map, and I don't expect you to be able to see all of that. But the green are transit projects, and the blue are highway projects, because we are responsible, I'm responsible as the Chief Executive Officer for both highway and transit, which makes us unique. We went to the voters in 2016. We asked for a half-cent sales tax to build needed infrastructure in LA County. This sales tax was approved by 71% of LA voters in 2016. 71%, because we understood and we knew how to explain the benefits of infrastructure. I'm happy to say that we partnered with Bishop Blake and the ministers in LA County. Bishop Blake was gracious enough to convene a news conference, a press conference in support of that measure. And that passed in large part due to his and the minister's involvement. What is this Measure M then? This is the most ambitious and the most comprehensive voter-approved transportation program in America. For the first 40 years, it will generate $120 billion. We are talking about 40 major infrastructure projects in the first 40 years. We are talking about keeping fares affordable and attainable for seniors, for students, for the disabled. We are talking about sending money to the 88 cities within the county. There are transportation initiatives all over the country in your areas that we want you to get involved with as well. Next slide. This is a little bit of that Measure M. As you know, as many of you know, Los Angeles won the Olympics for 2028. And let me acknowledge Lady May, who is my first lady as well. 2028, not only were we successful with this half-cent tax measure that's going to generate $120 billion over 40 years, but we also won the Olympics for 2028, 10 years from now. And so we are working on infrastructure to accommodate the Olympics as well. Next slide. I want to talk just a little bit about economic development and joint development, because we see this Measure M as both a mobility plan and an economic development plan, building housing, partnering with the community development corporations, both in Los Angeles and around the country. What you see here is our partnership with West Angeles Community Development Corporation. This is a rendering of the development that is going on just south of West Angeles Cathedral. We made sure that West Angeles was an equity partner in this deal. And I say equity partner because we want them to make money. We have built, when I say we, I'm talking about the Metropolitan Transportation Authority. We've built about 2,000 residential units thus far. We have more projects in the pipeline. As I said, this is one just south of the cathedral. And what we've said on all of our residential property that we own, and keep in mind that your transportation authorities around the country are probably some of the biggest owners of property. They have an inventory of property right around your churches, right around your areas where you worship. You should be talking to that transportation agency about how you can acquire some of that property for little or nothing to do things that are beneficial to the community. So this is what we will build just south of West Angeles. Next slide. We want to influence the development of transit-oriented communities that help what I call the indigenous people of various communities to thrive and prevent their displacement. That's right. To prevent the gentrification that goes on in communities where we come in, we being the Transportation Authority, where we come in and invest all of this money, and then when we have the investment built, the community changes, and the people that we were building for are not, and they do not benefit from the very investment that we said when we started the project. And so what we have said is that we will do all that we can to make sure that that displacement does not happen. This happens to be one of our stations in Pasadena. Next slide. The other thing that we are looking to do in this Measure M, as we look at the Measure M project, $120 billion, by the way, with no sunset, what we did, and I'm still amazed at this, and this is just a blessing. I feel like Joseph in the Old Testament, who was a great administrator. And I also feel like I'm going to be in charge of infrastructure in heaven too. I think there's going to be, the streets are paved with gold. Somebody got to take care of that. We are looking to create 700,000 jobs with this measure over 40 years. The transportation infrastructure industry is facing a major challenge to build a qualified workforce to do all of this building and infrastructure that we're talking about. Construction jobs, special trades, hard to fill positions like track and signal maintainers. All of these things, the same demographics around the country, the same need for a qualified workforce exists in all of your areas to build much infrastructure. We are beginning to face a disaster in infrastructure. Why? Our bridges are deteriorating. Our streets cannot accommodate the volume of cars on it. Our transit systems were not designed or built for the number of people that are riding it now. And not to even mention climate change that's bringing hurricanes and floods. This is deteriorating and destroying infrastructure. Do we have the qualified workforce to rebuild that infrastructure? In terms of jobs as well, What we call the local hire program was terminated by this administration. What we've said and what we wanted in the local hire program was to make sure that people that lived in the various communities actually built the infrastructure where they lived. And so when federal dollars are in a project, we wanted to hire locally. The Trump administration terminated that program, but we said that if it's local dollars in the program, we will continue that local hire program and hire ex-felons and hire young people that are in the community. Workforce initiative programs, and I'll move through this quicker. Workforce development programs developed to focus on creating career pathways. What we don't want is we build a qualified workforce. We don't want our people and people of color, black and brown alike, we don't want them just to be a flag person on a construction site.
That's right.
Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but we want them to be qualified in the various disciplines that we need in this country to build the infrastructure that we're talking about. Next slide, please. And so with that, we are building a transportation school. A transportation school on the site of the Rodney King riots. Grades 9 to 12 in South Los Angeles, on Vermont and Manchester. We are looking at a career pathway in transportation infrastructure with the school, and I see Reverend Pastor Williams is here from Los Angeles, where we are building this school right across the street from his church, the 88th Street Church of God in Christ. Okay, there he is. We're starting this transportation infrastructure school, and the idea here is a cradle to grave career pathway. The cradle is the school, grades 9 to 12, where we will be teaching STEM, but we will also be teaching infrastructure design, public-private partnerships, design build, and then the grave, of course, is the CEO position, cradle to grave, all the way through where our kids can understand. Next slide, please. Embracing equity. We want to, all of the projects, and this is in your areas as well. If a project is being built in your community, we should be looking through the lens of equity. Looking through the lens of equity. If we build this project, if we build this infrastructure project in various communities, how does it mesh with the equity of the community that we're building in? And so this is very, very important to us as well. Next slide, please. Let me just briefly talk about project delivery. Because when communities talk to government about projects, it's important that you understand the language of government. And so there's various ways that you will hear in terms of building projects. Basic project delivery, I want everyone to understand it. Design, build, design, bid, build, public-private partnerships, design, build, finance, operate, maintain. Next slide, please. When we talk about design, bid, build, it's a separate contract for design and construction, right? 100% design, because you just can't go in and start building something, you have to design it. Just like if you were going to build your house, you're going to draw a sketch, you're going to design it. And so understanding the delivery methods for infrastructure is very important for our church and the Church of God in Christ. And so how do you get in on the various stages of construction? If you are a design firm, you want to get in on the design portion, correct? And you have members that are designers. So this is design, bid, build, where we design the project first, and then we bid out the construction part of the project later. And so design, bid, build is very, very important. There's things like construction management at risk. There's things like a guaranteed maximum price, and I don't expect you to remember all of this, but understanding the lingo in terms of project delivery and understanding the language of government as you advocate for infrastructure building in your regions. Next slide. I talked a little bit about design build. This is the owner contracts to a single entity to design and construct the project. It can be initiated between 30 and 90% of the design completion, and then primary considerations are opportunities for private sector innovation. And so design build is becoming more and more used around the country in terms of projects. Next slide. Public-private partnerships. These are projects where we're asking, right, the private sector to put their money into the project up front with a payback on the back end. Now, we know with the recent tax bill that was passed under this administration, where the corporate tax rate went from 32% to 22%, 32 to 22%, there's a lot of money that the private sector and corporations have, and the best place to invest that money, in my opinion, is infrastructure. Now, there is a reasonable rate of return that's expected from the private sector. Now, you know, I tried to go to the private sector and say that it is your civic duty to build infrastructure with no rate of return. And that didn't go over too well. But this idea of the private sector investing in infrastructure with a reasonable rate of return goes to the private sector operating and maintaining the asset, and then they get paid from the fees from the asset. The best example is a toll road. They will go in, they will invest up front to build that infrastructure, that being a toll road, and then they want to collect the tolls for the next 30 years. Great example is the Chicago Skyway, a 99-year deal with a Spanish company, and these things are sold off and on to different entities, but they collect that revenue, and it is usually called availability payments that are paid to the private sector. So why is that a good thing? It gets the infrastructure built faster, and it's usually cheaper as well. Next slide. So these could be models. Leveling the playing field for small and disadvantaged and veteran and women-owned businesses. COGIC should be at the forefront of talking to infrastructure authorities in all of your cities and advocating for members, business owner members of your congregations about how you can get involved and how you can provide opportunities for business members in your congregations. It is mandated. If there is work that small businesses can do, it is mandated that there be a goal on those projects, as many of you know. But what I've said is it's not enough for our small and minority and women and veteran-owned businesses to have subcontracting opportunities. That's not enough. What I want to see is small and minority-owned businesses priming that project and have the big companies sub to them. And so that's what we're talking about. And then lastly, let me just give you some examples of some of the vibrancy and the areas in urban areas where this infrastructure is going on and where we have insisted that there be minority participation, where we have insisted that we partner with the clergy, where we have insisted that foster care kids, that disadvantaged kids have an opportunity to work on projects. Next slide. One is Denver Fast Tracks that was mentioned. This was a 2004 ballot initiative that I was involved in, and we raised and brought to the public, and it was passed by the public, a sales tax initiative to build infrastructure in the Rocky Mountain area, where we had a number of small businesses benefit, and we built a number of residential facilities and homes and senior facilities for people that were less fortunate. Next slide. Union Station, if you're ever in Denver, Union Station, the investment that went on there was tremendous. Next slide. Some of the, and I don't expect you to see all of that, but 3,000 residential units around Denver Union Station, 2 million square feet of office space, 375,000 square feet of retail, 752 hotel rooms, $3 billion in real estate development around that transportation hub, and that was not enough for us. We insisted on minority business participation. We insisted on young people of color, black and brown, having opportunities to move forward. Next slide. Hudson Yards in New York. Hudson Yards, great infrastructure, rising all around the country, and Hudson Yards built on 28 acres, over 30 active rail tracks, more than 4,000 residential units, a new park, a new school, commercial space, new subway station. It's a great example of infill development, and it dawns on me that the Church of God in Christ should appoint an infrastructure czar, an infrastructure person who pays attention to the infrastructure matters and alerts you when opportunities surface. The church should, as I mentioned earlier, request a meeting with Secretary of Department of Transportation Elaine Chao, and I'd be happy to go there with you. And talk about infrastructure and talk about how the church must be involved in that infrastructure. Next slide. Chicago Transit Development, they are doing development. We need to make sure that the development they're doing is attainable and affordable for the lower socioeconomic populations that make up our churches. Call my brother there. He's not my blood brother, but we have a person of color who's a CEO in Chicago, Dorval Carter. Tell him that Phil Washington called you. And you don't even have to be from Chicago, just go there anyway and have him talk to you about how they are involved with making sure that infrastructure is available. Next slide. We talked about Atlanta. The Atlanta Beltway is another great example. This project is 22 miles of multi-use trails and parks and future modern streetcar lines. It is a catalyst for community development around the Atlanta area, and they already have about $3 billion in investments around the Beltway. Next slide. Some of the other things in Los Angeles, we're building a Metro Rail airport connection off the Crenshaw line that runs right next to Bishop Blake's church. LAX is the second busiest airport in the U.S. We will open this station in about 3 years or so, 3 or 4 years or so. It's one of the projects that is helping us prepare LA for the 2028 Olympics, and even before that and beyond that for the people that live in the Crenshaw area. Next slide. Let me talk about very briefly about the cost of doing nothing. The cost of doing nothing, especially in our disadvantaged communities. It's going to lead to bad infrastructure. It's going to lead to things that are not good for our health, poor health outcomes, fewer opportunities. We need the congregation, we need the Church of God in Christ to be involved. Right now, as I mentioned, with Congress turning hands, what we're talking about is a new infrastructure bill. We need to challenge this administration. on how that infrastructure bill will help our communities. Lastly, as we talk about this infrastructure, what we're thinking about is how we will leave what I call an infrastructure inheritance for our kids and grandkids. How not just building, but making sure they have the skills to continue to maintain the infrastructure that we're building. And so, finally, last slide, let me just, as I close, talk about how I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate Bishop Blake's leadership. I appreciate the General Board's leadership. I appreciate Bishop Bass's leadership in this urban initiative. I met Bishop Bass probably 2 years ago, and we were talking about infrastructure, and Bishop Bass told me a couple years ago, we're gonna get you to the convocation. I said, okay, we'll see. And here I am. But I think that the call to action must be that COGIC must be involved and must be relevant to the infrastructure conversation. You're going to hear more and more about this infrastructure. Your leadership in this is very, very important. We know that leadership can be dangerous. We know that great leadership is what we have in COGIC. And so the question becomes, can we provide that great leadership and still survive, if you will, in speaking truth to power? So thank you for having me here. I appreciate it.